Being in a beautiful location does not guarantee great photographs. As I often say, a great view doesn't make for a great image. Today, I'm going to show you how I eventually found a decent composition, how I captured it, and how I post-processed it. And this is that image. But here's the thing. I spent 3 days in the Golden Gate Highlands National Park, and almost nothing was working. You might know the feeling. You're in a place that really should deliver incredible images, but somehow the shots just feel underwhelming. The scene is beautiful, the location perfect, yet something just isn't clicking. That was exactly what was happening here. I had a couple of images I liked from the first couple of days, but the trip just wasn't giving me what I had hoped for. The light wasn't cooperating, it was just so bright pretty much the whole day. So other than golden hour, I just had harsh light. The composition somehow felt forced, and honestly, I really thought I was going to go home without the shot that I really wanted. And then, on that final afternoon, something changed. I think maybe because I wasn't chasing a composition anymore, I simply stumbled across it. And, of course, this is where everything came together. The light, the foreground, the way the landscape layered into the distance, it all just clicked. So, let me take you to the moment when it happened, and you'll see. I was pretty excited. And then I'll show you how I post-processed the image to get to the final outcome. So the sun is getting low. I found a composition. Geez, I feel a bit fortunate with this one. I've not seen much colour. We're into late spring, early summer here, and there's not much colour about, but take a look at this plant. Just a beautiful colour, and then behind it, you've got this beautiful ravine flowing through the mountains. Just stunning, man. So I feel somewhat fortunate to have stumbled across that, because that's more luck than judgment. Let's see if I can do it justice. Right, we've got a bit of wind, which means I've got some movement in that plant. So I need a shutter speed that's going to get rid of that. I want 250 really. So I'm going to stack the image. It means I'm going to shoot at f4. And I'm going to take 4 or 5 shots. And I'm going to adjust the shutter speed as I go. Although the sun has just broken the cloud, so I might get the shutter speed I need for the foreground. Now I'm going to have to sacrifice a little bit of ISO. Let's go to 125. 1/250th of a second should do it. And I want a shot for the sky. So I'm going to just speed that up. Just to get rid of those highlights. Now I'm going to have real hazy top left because the sun is just there. But I don't mind that. I think that's going to work really nicely coming across the image. I then decided that maybe a vertical shot might work better than horizontal. Yeah, you know what, with those clouds in the sky, that might actually be better.
Oh, that's beautiful, man.
I'm really liking this image, but I feel so nervous that I'm not capturing it. And there's too much brightness on the screen, so I can't really review the images as well as I'd like. I faffed around for another 10 or 15 minutes trying to make sure that I'd captured something I'd be happy with. Let's see how we got on. So here we are in Lightroom, and as you can see, I've got the merged file. So I took 4 images front to back, and you can see that we're pretty sharp at the back of the image, we're pretty sharp in the midground, and we're pretty sharp in the foreground as well. And then we've merged that in Photoshop, and now we have a TIFF image, and you can see a slight white border around the edge where it's aligned the 4 images. We're going to crop that image, not just to get rid of those lines. I just don't like the aspect ratio. For me, there's just a little bit too much sky there. So I'm going to use the 8.5 by 11 ratio. Just going to bring that down a touch. And then we'll just bring it in from the edges to remove that white border around the edge. I think I'm pretty happy with that. Yep, that works. I shot the images at ISO 125 and then just adjusted the shutter speed to try and correct the exposure for the different shots through the image. What that means is there's no noise reduction necessary, certainly no noise in the image, so I'm going to skip that section. And I'm not sure about sharpening. I sometimes sharpen at the beginning of the process, sometimes at the end. In this case, I'm going to leave it to the end, see if it's necessary. So I'm going to jump straight into the basic panel, and I'm going to just bring the contrast up a little. Feels about right. Yeah, about 22. I'm going to bring the highlights down quite considerably, and what I'm trying to do here is just affect these highlights up in the top left, which we knew at the time was going to make that area extremely bright. So just bringing that down quite considerably. Then I'm going to just adjust the vibrance of the image and bring the saturation down to adjust for that a little bit. I'm going to deal with the exposure in different sections using masks rather than a global adjustment on exposure. You can see at the front of the image, I need to raise the brightness of the image, and at the back of the image, the sky or the top of the image, obviously I don't want to brighten that up any more than it already is. So I'll do that with masks. One thing that at a global level is definitely off from when I took the image is the temperature. It just felt so much warmer than the image is representing. So I'm going to adjust the temperature, probably about 10. I think that's fine. Bring the tint up a little bit just to take those greens out of the sky. And for global adjustments, that's about it. But there's going to be quite a few masks here. So let's get started with the first mask, which will be a linear gradient from the bottom. And what I want to do in this area is really bring those shadows up quite considerably. So into the tone panel, and we'll shift that. Yeah, that's much better. Don't need to touch the exposure. That's sufficient. So we'll go into the mask again, and this time I'm going to select the subject and see what job it does with those flowers. And actually, I'm pretty pleased with that. Now, I could do some work just to tidy that up, but I'm not going to make massive adjustments here. Again, it's more about the brightness of those flowers. So I'm going to bring the shadows up and to about 30, something like that. And I'm going to just bring the whites up a touch as well. About 13's fine. So it just makes those petals on the flower a bit more punchy. The next mask I'm going to introduce is a radial gradient, and I'm going to bring that in from the outside of the image. And you'll have seen this technique a few times. I certainly use it. Got to be relatively careful not to overdo it. Certainly make the feather the maximum. Make sure the central point is just outside of the image. And this is to reflect the sun a little more, bringing that light in. So I'm going to add some negative dehaze. It's really easy to overdo this. So I'm going to leave that as -12. And then I'm going to just counteract the additional brightness that's brought in by bringing the highlights down. Yeah, I think I'm going to need to bring that down about 55, something like that. And then again, I'm going to take the white balance up. I'm going to bring the temperature up. And again, that's going to be quite considerably. Don't want to overdo it. And I'm going to bring the tint up a little bit as well, just to counter some of the greens that brings into the image. I think that works, but I might come back to it. I'm just going to grab the whites and bring those down a little bit as well. 10, 11, 12, something like that. I think that works. The next mask is another linear gradient, and that's just this top right area. I want to accentuate those clouds a little bit. And so to do that, I'm just going to try and bring down the exposure a bit. That's too much, looks like a vignette. Yeah, okay, let's leave that there. And increase the contrast quite considerably. Grab the shadows and bring those down. And we'll also bring the blacks down a touch, just to balance that off. And I think that works. So before that mask, after that mask. Yeah, that definitely works for me. It's very, very blue. That saturation in the sky I'm going to have to deal with in just a moment. Now, one of the things about taking the image, what I noticed at the time was the shafts of light coming across the landscape, and that's really not coming through in this image. You can see elements of it here in the midground and just touching the mountains, but it was really much more dramatic than that. And even in the foreground here, it was much more dramatic the way the light was falling on those stones, those rocks. So I'm going to create a luminance mask. And I'm going to select for the brighter area, and the selection has grabbed a big chunk of the image there. So I'm going to reduce that selection. I'm just going to fine tune the range a little, just to try and get that a bit more accurate to what I'm looking for. And I do feel this is as much an art as a science using this range selector. Never seem to quite get it right. That feels better. And then I'm going to subtract from that the elements of the image that I don't want to be selected. So first and foremost, I know I don't want the sky. And I'm going to grab a brush and be a bit more selective with my brush. I'll bring the flow down a little bit. In fact, let's put it up to 100 to get rid of the areas that I know I definitely don't want to be selected here, bearing in mind that I'm going to be making these areas brighter to reflect that sun coming across the image. And I've already adjusted for my flowers, so I really don't want to over accentuate that. I also am not comfortable with the sun grabbing too much of these very back parts of the mountains, because that was a little bit hazy. So I'm going to increase the size of my brush, and I'm just going to take those elements off where it's really hazy, then reduce the flow and move across a little just to take that effect down, then reduce the flow again and come back over. So that should feather that in quite nicely. Let's have a look and see how that works once I increase the exposure and the temperature. Yeah, I think I might come back to that and fine tune it, but I'm comfortable with it for now. It feels a bit more dramatic the way that's pulling in across the landscape. But just have a look at the contrast, maybe a touch, not too much. That's fine. Let's move on, and I want to darken this bottom area of the image. I don't want a vignette as such, but I just want to darken that area. So the best way for me to do that is with a radial gradient, a large radial gradient, bigger than the whole image. Just centralize that a little bit, and I'm going to make the feather much less graduated. And then I'm going to invert that mask. And that's, I think, pretty much where I want that. And I'm going to bring the exposure down by about 1/3 of a stop. And also bring the highlights down quite considerably, just to stop that being a distraction. Have a look at the before and after. That's before, and that's after. It's actually relatively subtle considering the amount of movement on the sliders, which is why you really shouldn't be worried too much about the numbers on the sliders. It's about the effect it's having on the image. That's what's important. So some fairly big movements on the sliders, especially on the highlights, but the impact remains fairly subtle, and that's what I want there. But I think the foreground is still overall a little bit too dark. So I'm going to add another mask, again, a radial gradient, and it's going to be across this portion of the image. Feather that a little bit more and angle that. That's pretty good. And I'm just going to make a slight adjustment to the exposure there. Yeah, that feels about right for me. Maybe a touch more. And then I'm going to add some contrast. Gain about 20 on that one. And I'm also going to bring the shadows up. And I'm pretty happy with that. It just brings a bit more attention to that area of the image. Okay, for masks, that's about it. I may come back to them unless I can stop tweaking. But I'm going to look a bit more at the color now. So I'm going to jump straight into the color mixer. And there's only a couple of changes I want here. So firstly, from a hue perspective, it's looking a little bit yellow for me. So I'm just going to move the yellows a touch towards the orange. And I think that works quite nicely. And then from a saturation perspective, I mentioned earlier the blues just look a little bit saturated. So I'm just going to bring that down just a touch. And I might need to come back to that once I do some more work on the colors, but I'll leave that there for now. Then I'm going to jump into color grading. I'm happy with the luminance. Color grading, pretty standard. You'll have seen this move 1,000 times on YouTube. Just bring some blues into the shadows and then bring some oranges into the highlights. That just warms up the image a little bit further, but gives you a nice contrast between shadows and highlights. And I'm pretty happy with that. And then the big impact is in the color calibration. This isn't a tutorial, so I'm not going to talk to you about the details of calibration. If you want me to do a video on that, then drop me a note in the comments below. But there's plenty of really good videos out there on how to use the calibration tool. But in this case, I'm just going to pump the saturation of the blues quite considerably. And you can see that really raises the impact on the image. It's a lot more punchy. If I show you the before and then the after. And the only negative impact of that change for me is in the sky. It's just oversaturating those blues. So I'm going to jump back to the color mixer and I'm going to bring the blues down quite considerably on the saturation. Yeah, to about 50. And I'm pretty comfortable with the image as it is. Let's look at a before and after. Before image, a little bit flat, a little bit one-dimensional. And then the after image is a lot punchier and I think is a lot closer to what I actually saw. That works for me. Definitely doesn't need any sharpening. Okay, couple of final tweaks for me. This mask with the luminance I'm not comfortable with, so I'm just going to adjust this range here and try and get that a little bit more where I need it to be. And as I say, I think this is an art more than a science. You've really got to just trial and error this. I'll fast forward this section as I tweak this until I'm comfortable. And that feels a little bit better to me, but I'm going to increase the temperature even further than I have so far. That's definitely better. Much more what I'm looking for. And talking of warmth, the final change I want to make is here, and I don't think that's warm enough. So I'm going to raise that. And that, I think, is the end of the adjustment. We'll do a quick before and after. That's before. Pretty flat, pretty one-dimensional, and definitely not reflecting the atmosphere and the sense that I had when I took the image. And there's the after, which is much more dramatic and much more resonant with me of what I actually saw. And that is the final image. I hope you enjoyed the video and would love to hear your thoughts. Drop me a note in the comments below. I read every single one of them and I respond to as many as I possibly can. Look forward to seeing you again soon. Until then, please, take care. Bye-bye.